If I've learned anything from songwriters, it's that hacky sack is apparently still a thing. And also, no metaphor about a bird is ever safe. Now, something useful that you can learn from songwriters is there's one chord that is always going to sound good going outside of a key that can be utilized in really creative ways. So we're talking about the flat 7 chord today. We're going to come up with some examples how you can use it in maybe your own songwriting and kind of why it sounds the way it does. All right. So real quick, going to breeze through the diatonic scale chords that you have available to you. Every key has 7 notes in it. All those notes become a chord. Keep it super simple. Key of C, there's 3 major chords, 3 minor chords. The 1 chord is C major, the 2 chord is D minor, the 3 chord is E minor, the 4 chord is F major, the 5 chord is G major, the 6 chord is A minor, the 7 chord is B minor 7 flat 5. I almost did that without having to breathe. And then back to the 1 chord, okay? So diatonically speaking, those are the main chords that you have available to make a chord progression, all right? Now, a lot of times, this B half diminished minor 7 flat 5 chord kind of gets thrown out and doesn't really get equal billing with the rest of them because of reasons. But the flat 7 chord is going to be another major chord that you can use. A lot of times whenever you see a song that has 4 different major chords, this is the chord that is going outside of the key to kind of introduce. All right, so what a flat 7 chord means is it means if you take the 7th note in the major scale, it's always easy to find the 7th note in major scale. Don't waste your time by going up through the major scale. Go backwards 1 note, right? So in the key of C, back 1 note is the 7th note in that key, right? If we flatten that, it's right there. Already sounds kind of wrong, right? So in the key of C, a B flat is the 7th note. So a 7 major chord is when you take that note and turn it into a B flat major. You can play it like this, you can play it like this. Lots of cool different ways you can play it, all right? Now, conceptually, it's very easy to find because you just take the 1 chord, the root chord of whatever key you're in. If you're in the key of G, you just go 2 frets backwards, a whole step down. So in the key of G, F major is a chord that you could have available to you, all right? So if you take nothing else from this video, just know whatever key you're in, drop it a step, make that a major chord, and you've got yourself a flat 7 major chord, all right? Now, how this sounds is something that you've heard several times already. I think the first time I really noticed this and kind of like coming across and being like this and thinking at the time that like, oh, these chords don't usually go together, but not understanding at all why that happened was learning Rolling Stones songs. The Rolling Stones are a band that really utilizes this in like a fantastic way, all right? Like the chorus for Wild Horses. It's in the key of G. The whole song is in the key of G. It goes A minor, C, C, G, C, D, G, F. Right? Okay, so right there, those chords were A minor to C, C to D, G, F, C. Now when you just hear that section of music, that F doesn't really stick out that much. You might kind of hear it a little bit, but this is what we're talking about. This is that flat 7 major chord, all right? Now, it's one thing for me to tell you this is in the key of G and be like, oh, an F major is going to sound good, right? That doesn't really, you're not really learning a whole lot in that instance. But it's the way that this band specifically uses this chord a lot that I think you'll find a lot of value creatively in doing it. So the verse for that song is strictly diatonically in the key of G. It starts out with a B minor to a G, and that repeats again, right? So this would be the 3 chord to the 1 chord, and then it goes to the 2 chord, A minor, to the 4 chord, C, to the 5 chord, then back 1 to 5. You know, pretty standard. So then by the time you get to that chorus, your ears have really been trained in the key of G. So by the time you hit that F and you just kind of almost glance over that F chord, it really has a lot of impact in a songwriting atmosphere. Another good example of that from the same band is a song that I broke down in a previous episode of Riff Deconstruction, Ruby Tuesday, okay? The chorus of that, it's like, goodbye, Ruby Tuesday, who could hang a name on you when you change? Right, so this is really in the key of C, and then that last part in that chorus, after we repeat a few times around, it goes to that B flat, that flat 7 chord, that flat major chord, all right? So I also think that setting a song up like that to use this chord in a certain spot has a little bit more impact than just always having the chord available to you. Because it's one thing, when you're writing a song and maybe you're just kind of randomly picking diatonic numbers, like I'm just gonna pick like a 1, 6, 3 progression, and be like, all right, that's in C major to the 6th chord, A minor to the 3 chord, E minor, and then just knowing that like there's a B flat that I can throw in there whenever. I personally think that has a little bit of a different flavor than using a little more tastefully. Great example of something like that, just like having B flat be a chord in the key of C, which is totally fine, is a progression like a C to a G to a B flat to an F. When it's used in this way, it's the same thing. You can see this as the 1 chord to the 5 chord to the flat 7 major chord to the 4 chord. But in that case, to me, the sound of that is almost like a C to a G, and then the whole thing repeated down a step. Because, it is just a different way of looking at the exact same thing, okay? I personally think it's a more creative way of going outside when you kind of have a setup for it where maybe you're not totally expecting it and you're not driving home the fact that there's 4 major chords in a key, or the key that you're kind of like using when you're technically borrowing this chord from somewhere else, which we'll talk more about in a second. I think it works better almost as a replacement of a chord that you're more familiar with. So what I mean by that is, like, let's say we have something like in the key of C, just sticking in this key of C again, a C major to an A minor to a C major to an F, right? It's like a 1 to a 6 to a 1 to a 4, or however you want to splice it up. There's 2 spots for a 1 chord there. I think a cool way to do that is maybe replacing that 1 chord almost every now and then with that flat 7 chord. So the second C in that C, A minor, C, F progression we're just making up can be that B flat now. C major. The first time I'll do it regular, C to F. Then maybe the second time, and it sounds just a little bit different going that way. And especially if you want to kind of still hammer home that it's firmly in the key of C, you could always put that chord's dominant chord in it, right? That key's dominant chord, the 5th note, which is going to be C, D, E, F, G. All right, so C, A minor, C, F, G, C, A minor, B, F. And in that kind of context, I think that flat 7 chord has a little bit more impact. Again, that's just my opinion. You can use it for, however you want to kind of like see this chord as something that you can kind of pull from creatively. That's on you. Do your thing. No judgment here, right? But I've also heard kind of some people describe this as like, where does this chord come from? Where are we borrowing it from? At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. If it sounds good, it sounds good. But one way to think of this is maybe taking the key of C and seeing this flat 7 is coming from its parallel minor, which happens a lot. You can kind of hear that in music a lot, where maybe a piece will change from major to minor in the same key. So maybe like all of a sudden we're thinking in the key of C, but then quickly we start operating from C major to C minor, which kind of changes up all the chords. So in that kind of thing, we're thinking of like a key change. And that minor 7 interval is really important in the minor scale. So, if we kind of take a note from there, this is kind of like a perspective of like, okay, well, where are we borrowing this from? I personally think of it as almost just a different way of kind of like going outside to another key that is very close to the key of C, right? I almost think of, you can think of the circle of fifths, or if you go counterclockwise, like a true boss, you can think of it as like a circle of fourths, right? Because if we think of, all right, there's a key of C that has just the notes C, D, E, F, G, A, B. A lot of people think, well, what's the closest thing to the key of C? Well, they'll be like, oh, that's the key of G, because it just has 1 sharp. But so often we neglect that the key of F is just as much like the key of C as the key of G is like the key of C. If you're confused by that, I don't blame you, because I'm just kind of rambling. It's kind of late right now. I totally get it. But the key of F has that B flat in there. So we're just kind of like populating one bigger kind of group of chords to draw from. I think in the circle of fifths or the circle of fourths, whichever way you're going. Again, I'll link you to a video on the circle of fifths if you have no idea what that is, because that's a super helpful and underrated songwriting tool that I think kind of gets explained in a very boring, confusing way that I tried to rectify to varying results, if you want to check that out. But I think it's just kind of like a different way of maybe seamlessly pulling chords from a couple different spots that are very like each other. So it's a really common thing that, like, if you just kind of keep your eyes open and your ears open for, you're going to hear a little bit more of. And it's something that you can always sprinkle in that's going to be technically outside of a diatonic key, but really will always kind of sound like it has a place. All right. So however you want to use it, I think another cool thing to do is just maybe make it even like a major 7 chord, which is cool, which is something I do with all my chords anyways. But kind of like we talked about, diatonically, that 7th chord, that regular 7th chord, is that B minor 7 flat 5, or that B half diminished, where I've got my pointer finger on the 2nd fret of the A string, my ring finger on the 3rd fret of the D string, my middle finger on the 2nd fret of the G string, my pinky on the 3rd fret of the B string. Right there, if we just take that root note and drop it, then we have that flat 7 chord as a major 7 chord, okay? So, this is something that I don't want to say it sounds more pleasant, because I feel like that's not giving the minor 7 flat 5 chord its due, but it's totally true. It just sounds more pleasant adding a 3rd major 7 chord, a 4th major chord into a key, because then you can start just getting super major 7-y. There's the 1 chord in the key of C, the 4 chord, the flat 7 chord. And they're all major 7 chords. Same voicing. I'm just rooting it on the 3rd fret, which is a C, on the 8th fret, which is a F, and then on the 1st fret, which is a B flat. And then I can still get super bluesy by adding that dominant 7 on the 5 chord, that G 7 chord. So, kind of a lot of different uses. I realize I'm jumping around a lot, but I just think they're just different ideas that maybe, if you do have ambitions to write songs, it's kind of a cool thing to see. And even just when it comes to memorizing chord progressions, it's helpful just to think in numbers, because it's so much easier to remember, like, okay, well, this is a 1, 5, 4 flat 7 progression, instead of like, God, C major to G major to F major to B flat. It's kind of just chunking information like that in numbers is so much easier, and your musicianship will thank you, just as I thank you for sticking with me this long for this incredible journey down the flat 7 inside outside extravaganza that we're all on. So if you have any questions or comments, hit me up in the comment section, Instagram, Twitter, or the website. Talk to y'all soon. Thanks a lot.